Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear DLD participants. Dearest Steffi, I am very pleased, but also I feel very humbled to be able to speak before you today, and most importantly, to meet many of you who I find to be an impressive, but also a very interesting and engaging crowd. As a member of the European Parliament for the past 10 years, I'm a believer in harnessing the power of technology for positive change, while at the same time ensuring that innovation aligns harmoniously with our shared democratic values. This was the same belief that has driven me throughout the many months and years of the negotiations and drafting of the European AI Act, of which I'm one of the drafts people. Steffi, I have to say you didn't give me a very easy task. Usually from this stage, you have great minds being motivational, inspiring for the crowd to go and get the next big thing and make the next big innovation. You gave me the task to speak about a very dry subject. So if this is not your right lab and panel and stage, feel free to move on to the next stage. However, if I have the chance to grasp your attention, let me say that I will not have my pink-colored glasses on today. I would be sober, and in fact, I listened to what Jonas had to say, and I remember that back then in September, when I addressed a similar crowd at the AI Summit that DLD put together, I did start with some of the reflections on where Europe is in terms of competitiveness, just like Jonas did today. But before we get to the 2 points, first of all, Steffi asked that I speak a bit about the AI Act, and then I would like to speak a little bit about what comes next. I just wanted to say that in the beginning of December, we reached an agreement on the European AI Act after 36 hours of negotiations. But what did not reach the headlines was that this was a process that took more than 2 years just in the European Parliament itself. It took more than 2 years, during which it was not just us in the Parliament discussing, but we were talking to external stakeholders. There were a number of multiple impact assessments that were concluded. So it was not just a couple of bureaucrats sitting on their desk drafting a law. Another thing I wanted to mention is that while 36 hours negotiation apparently is a record setting in European affairs, the real story of this political agreement is that we have laid out a common European vision for the future of this technology. One where AI is more democratic, one where AI is safer. We succeeded in putting in place guardrails that ensure AI systems are safe, that they are aligned with our democratic values, but also I believed we achieved a reasonable balance between safety and the openness to innovation. It has always been one of my priorities just like for, I believe, many of you in this room, to make sure that European companies can maintain their competitiveness and their innovative edge. I believe there's one thing very crystal clear for us here today, and this is that the AI is the next big thing when it comes to economic growth and productivity. AI can and will be an engine for European competitiveness. And trust me, I did fight very hard with some of my colleagues that they grasp that we do not just look inwards, that we just do not focus on the AI Act, but we actually see the bigger picture where Europe stands today and where we find ourselves today. This is why I would like to point at a few highlights that support European companies and their innovation innovation ambitions that are in the AI Act today. So first of all, the AI Act does not apply to every use case. It focuses just and only on the true high-risk use cases. We have focused on concrete uses that pose a risk to health, to safety, on fundamental rights, which means that we regulate the concrete high-risk use, not the entire sector. For all those companies asking if they're considered whether they're high risk, we have put concrete criteria in the text to provide that necessary legal certainty and help you make that determination. A second thing that we've did to support companies is that we have included a research and open source exemption. The AI Act now only applies to products once they're placed on the market. This means you can continue to engage in R&D, so as long as once that product is placed on the market and it meets all the requirements of the AI Act. The open source exemption will apply to almost all uses, except for select few that are linked to very powerful systems. Speaking on that, of course, the hot topic on generative AI system, what we've managed to achieve is a much more light touch and flexible approach compared to what was initially foreseen, and this includes a so-called two-tier approach that accounts for differences in capabilities and resources between companies. The text is much more agile today, it's future-proof, and it gives the AI office enough flexibility to keep up with all the technological change that we expect to see. This brings me to the second part of what I would like to mention today. Where do we go from here? We have reached a political deal. Our teams are putting some of those finishing touches on the text. Probably by early February, you can all see the final text. The Parliament afterwards will be able to adopt it, and it will gradually enter into force. The first entry into force will be already 6 months after being adopted formally, and it would be targeting the prohibited practices such as social scoring. 12 months afterwards will be for general purpose AI, and 2 years after for most high-risk applications. 3 years after for high-risk applications that are already heavily covered by other sectorial legislation. But beyond these technicalities, I would like to zoom out a bit and maybe give you a little bit more of a political take to explain you what is coming up next. I think it's time for Europe to see the bigger picture, to try and bring Europe on the track of Europe of the bigger ideas. Some say that one of our biggest achievements as Europeans is the single market or creating the euro. Well, what is our big achievement of today? Actually, of tomorrow, we should be asking here at DLD. I'm afraid to say it can't be a legislation regulating how electricity sockets should look like. Maybe that's the time when types are more predictable, safer, but not today. We can't champion this sort of legislations as our achievements. I think a true achievement for Europe today would be to work together, not just as one market, but as one mindset. We have a single market, but we still think as 27 different countries. If AI will be the next big driver of our economies, in Europe we will need to focus on where our strengths are, not just continue comparing ourselves to others. We have a very strong backbone of small companies all across Europe, and our energy should be spent showing those companies how to deploy AI in their everyday practices. We can all imagine the innovation, the growth potential, and the economic potential that can come from that. This is why the next European Commission should truly invest more time and put competitiveness at the heart of its work. I would like to see more initiatives that are forward-looking, that are strategic. We could say that in the past few years we had such legislation, such as the European Chips Act, but we need to reconsider how we look at research, how we look at innovation, how do we want to change the work that has led us to some of the good breakthroughs that Europe has had and multiply them. And sometimes this is not just done by continuing doing what we know how to do, but changing it. I've spoke to many of you over yesterday, in September, and throughout the years. Many of you say, yes, those things work, but they can work better. Well, let's work for that political leadership that is so needed to make sure that we could tweak things in order to deliver, in order to make sure that Europe will not just be about being a referee, but Europe will also be about being a player. And if we would, until now, have been the champions of values, many of those values, fundamental democratic values that have led to a lot of the developments we have in Europe. By the way, I would hope that companies in the AI domain would like to obey by those values, and I believe they do so. Well, let's now be the champions of competitiveness, the champions and the doers and the players for the next decade to come. But that would require political leadership. And I emphasize on that quite a bit because you need to dare to do that in a year where almost 2 billion people will go and cast their ballot to vote. 2024 could be the perfect storm for our democracies. And this is why now more than ever, it's important that we work together to set out an appealing but also an effective vision for the democratic governance of AI. But to set out this vision, we again need that true leadership. I used to call them tech leaders, and I believe that's how I addressed them in September. But if we don't like that term, because this does not mean that a politician should be able to code, but it means that those politicians should be able to create the right environment for those that are the true tech leaders to prosper, to develop, to create. So we can just call them leaders, but this should be the political leaders who look outwards, not inwards. These should be the ones who foster cooperation rather than sow division. These should be the leaders who understand that it's not about being first, but it's about getting it right. And I say this particularly when we had the discussions on the AI Act. Very often the conversation was about being first to put the rules on the table. And I often try to slow down the process to make it more meaningful by asking those bigger questions. What are we actually trying to achieve? And is this fit for purpose? It is not just about setting a gold standard as Europe. We are good at that, and we can do that. But it's now more important than ever that those golden standards are also global standards that companies and the international democratic partners are aligned with, and we are able to work together. So, dear friends of DLD, you see that the political deal that we have reached last year will have some sort of a profound impact, and it will go beyond European borders. But the next months and years will be crucial to setting out this common democratic vision for the development of AI. It will be, in a way, also the break it or make it moment for Europe's AI industry. And it will be up to the political leadership here in Europe to understand better these two aspects, to bring them together, to be able to work together, to chart forward a path that allows our continent to stay globally competitive. It is only with this economic might, I believe, that we will be able to continue setting the standards for these technologies ahead of us. So I very much look forward continuing our work together with many of you in shaping that important future together. Thank you.